And yet, Irving had this advice for the younger actor.
The most natural, the most seemingly accidental effects are obtained when the working of the mind is seen before the tongue gives it words.
And when he was talking about speaking and elocution as essential ingredients of great acting, Irving said,
"A very simple test is a reference to the records of old actors. What is it in their performances that chiefly impressed their contemporaries? Very often simple exclamations that deeply moved their auditors because it was a gleam of nature in the midst of declamation."
Well, the claims of naturalness on the one hand, as against high verbal music on the other, were argued throughout the 19th and indeed the 18th centuries. The critic George Henry Lewis, comparing Macready with Charles Keene, wrote,
"Macready's declamation was mannered and unmusical, yet he never allowed you to feel, as you feel in the declamation of Charles Keene, that he was speaking words which he did not thoroughly understand."
Lewis was also an eyewitness of Edmund Keene, and he had this to say of him.
"His voice was marvelously musical and had tones of a searching pathos."
This is not to say that Macready or even Charles and Edmund Keene were trying to be musical, but certainly it was in those terms that their contemporaries evaluated them. A critic wrote of David Garrick,
"Garrick was no declaimer. True conception of character and natural expression of it were his distinguishing excellencies."
We can only guess at that 18th century idea of natural expression. We do know that Garrick had a wig invented for him for his performance of Macbeth, so that by pulling a thread inside his costume, it would display his hair standing on end for the frightening bits. Colley Cibber, the actor and dramatist who knew both Garrick and Betterton, the 17th century actor, believed that the voice of the singer is not more strictly tied to time and tune than that of an actor in theatrical elocution. But for all that, he praised Betterton above all other actors because of his ability to be truthful and natural when lesser actors were in love with sound at the expense of sense. So, we've traced the discussion back almost to Shakespeare himself. And perhaps Shakespeare was voicing some of his predilections as a dramatist via the character of Hamlet when he makes it clear to the players that the speaking of dramatic language is a complicated business and that the balance is very difficult to get right.
"Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I'd have such a fellow whipped for a doing termagant, it out Herod's Herod. Pray you avoid it. Be not too tame, neither, but let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature, for anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is, to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature."
Of course, we have to remember that spoken English hasn't always sounded the same as it does now. So if we could go back in a time machine and step out into the middle of an audience at the Globe in 1590, watching the great Burbage performing, it's fairly certain that we would find him quite difficult to understand. Now, John, I know that there is a lot of scholastic disagreement about this, but could you tell us how Elizabethan English is likely to have sounded?
Well, I'm no expert on it at all, but I think I can give you some sort of approximation to what it may have been like. And I'll take a bit of what you heard earlier of the Olivier speech. "Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the walls up, we are English dead. In pace there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility, but when the blast of war blows in our air, then imitate the action of the tigger."
But John, that seems to be several modern dialects rolled into one.
Yes, it's a funny mixture of West Country, North Country, American and Irish, I would say.
Seems to have more diphthongs in it than in modern English.
Yes, the vowels are thicker and richer, and the consonants tend to be tougher and harder. For instance, just before Elizabethan English, KN in the word knight, like a knight on a horse, was still pronounced knight.
Was it a language that would be more conducive to onomatopoeia?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the same speech that I've just quoted from, to take one line, which is, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. The word war was war.
Dogs.
And that is onomatopoeically much more powerful.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of words like that.
It gives the lie to that commonly held belief in a lot of American academies, particularly those that are teaching acting, that in order to play Shakespeare, you have to speak it with a standard English accent with received pronunciation.
Oh, yes, I think it's arguable that American is closer to it than our received English.
Why did the Elizabethan dramatists choose to write in blank verse? Now, to break this down a bit, I suppose what we need to find out, first of all, is what kind of verse forms were used by dramatists before the Elizabethan dramatists came along. So, John, can you tell us something about earlier verse forms?
The earlier verse forms were full of doggerel and were very thumpy and didn't really approximate to real speech. If I could just read you 2 or 3 examples, you'll see that in all of them the rhythm is insistent to a degree that takes over from meaning and certainly from any sense of character. The first example is a little short one from a miracle play, which goes, all hail, both blithe and glad, for here come I, a merry lad. Pray cease your din, my master bade, or else the devil will you speed.
So how many stresses is that in the line? How many syllables, how many stresses?
An 8-syllable line with 4 stresses.
Yeah.
Here is what's called a fortina from a Tudor play called King Cambyses. Redoubted prince and mighty king, myself I prostrate here, vouchsafe, O king, with me to bear for this that I appear. With humble suit I pardon crave of your most royal grace to give me leave my mind to break before you in this place. You see, it's not speech, it's jingle, it's doggerel.
In a verse form that is as jingly as that, and therefore as difficult to make sound like real speech, are we also saying that verse like that is incapable of any complexity?
Absolutely.
Did the Elizabethan dramatists invent blank verse?
Blank verse was actually invented by the poet Surrey, and then the dramatists took it over. And it was first used in a rather academic play called Gorboduc in 1561, which is considerably before Shakespeare. And then it first got used at the end of the 1590s, and then it became the norm for all Elizabethan dramatists to write in.
Why was it so convenient, and once it was found convenient, why is it that all the dramatists employed that form, and although they experimented with it, didn't branch out and use other forms and other meters?
I think the main reason is a very simple, pragmatic one, is that the rhythm of a blank verse line most closely approximates to the norms of English speech. It actually does catch the way we talk. It is quite possible to catch somebody speaking blank verse today without actually thinking it. I think the other reason why it was used was that it had an enormous mnemonic value for an actor learning his lines. The Elizabethans did many, many plays in their repertory. In fact, we have record of one year in an Elizabethan playhouse where the actors had to learn 43 plays in a season, which is fantastic for the demands on an actor's memory. Now, I think it's a matter of, which our actors here will comment on better than I can, but that it is easier to learn and put into your head a lot of blank verse lines where the line is spelt out for you than it is to learn a more shapeless prose.
Well, is that true, what John is saying?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's set out in a particular pattern, and you can keep a picture of that pattern in your head.
Do you keep that picture in your head all the time?
No, only in rehearsal. Yeah. Once you're into performance, its use is over.
I think it's something to do with the shortness of the lines. The most difficult playwright I find to learn is Bernard Shaw, who writes long, very rhythmic sentences, but they're long and they're complicated. And the mnemonic for sure is the turn of the page rather than the end of the line.